So next up we have Miss Hazel O'Brien from the School of Humanities, who's going to look at viewing Irish continuity and change through Mormonism. Thank you, Hazel.
Thanks. Hi, everybody. So to tell you a little bit about who I am and why I'm here, if I'm a bit frazzled, it's because I'm about a month away from submitting my PhD thesis. So I'm a little bit all over the place, but that's really what the focus of this presentation today is about. I don't really have the time to tell you why I decided to do what I did, nor do I have the time to tell you how I did what I did, really. So what I'm going to do is just tell you a little bit about my overall conclusions, really, my final ideas that I'm trying to synthesize into something a little bit succinct. So let's see if this is a challenge to do this in 8 minutes today. I did my PhD through the University of Exeter, but I'm obviously based here in the School of Humanities. Really what I did was do an ethnographic project with Mormons in Ireland, 2 congregations of Mormons, one in the southeast and one a little further up the coast. But I was kind of looking specifically at them to try to understand something about the nature of religion in Ireland. We kind of get told a lot that there's a huge amount of change occurring within modern Ireland, that we've gone through great economic and social change. That's obviously affected our experiences of religion, and there's certainly a lot of academic theorising and speculating, and some more popular culture discussions of those ideas too. And I guess what I was trying to do was to make sense of all of that, what was going on, and that's really been my project so far. So I guess what I was trying to do, I think what I have done really, is kind of disrupt a narrative of secularisation that's dominated the sociology of religion within Ireland over the last maybe 30 years or so. There is a kind of a huge body out there that suggests that Ireland is very simply secularising, that our modernisation is making us less religious. And really what I found, I think, is that that is probably too simple of a narrative to explain what's actually occurring. There's plenty of evidence that, yes, atheists are increasing and the numbers identifying as Catholic in Ireland are decreasing, but there's also great evidence of new religions emerging and of increasing numbers joining small religions in Ireland that kind of counteracts that idea. And so really what I've tried to do is to show how actually belief continues in the modern age, that the secularisation story might not be as simple as we think that it is. I'm particularly informed theoretically by a French sociologist, Danielle Hervieux-Léger, and her 2000 book, Religion as a Chain of Memory. She basically argues that religion hinges on tradition, and that we assume that tradition must disappear in modernity, but that that's not necessarily always the case. And I definitely have found good evidence of that in my own work. I've shown you here some examples of the kind of thing that I'm talking about. The fact that when somebody converts, let's say, from Catholicism to Mormonism, that we assume that there must be a rupture, a break of tradition, that you're leaving one religious tradition to join another. But in fact, actually, there can be great continuity across religious traditions. And a lot of research in the sociology of religion in Ireland has shown that. The fact that there are values across different religious traditions that provide a good transition, stuff like family or a belief in Jesus Christ or whatever else it may be. And that can continue even across traditions that we think can be quite different from each other, like Catholicism and Islam, for instance. So there is a strong sense that actually there is a continuation of tradition in modernity and even across different religious traditions. To show you a little bit about what I found in my own research, just to give you an example of conversion, for instance, I found some really interesting narratives in the participants of my research on this. They all were kind of talking about their conversion to Mormonism by talking about Catholicism, that even though they'd moved to something different, they were actually still reverting back to the same old to make sense of their experiences. So for instance, some people were speaking to me about the fact that they had converted to Mormonism because they wanted to reject Catholicism. They disliked what it was or what it stood for. Oftentimes they would frame that as being a dislike of the entanglement of the Catholic Church and the Irish state, for instance. And that was one way of looking at it. Others that I spoke to on the same issue were saying almost the opposite, that they liked the conservative component of Catholicism and the high level of adherence that Catholicism used to involve in previous generations. They felt that that had been lost, and so that they hoped that when they converted to Mormonism that they might regain that. But in both cases, whether they're rejecting Catholicism or kind of have a longing for what Catholicism used to be, they're still framing their current religious experiences through Catholicism. So they're still bringing this old tradition into the new. And I think it's another great example of how there is a kind of a continuity. Catholicism is still continuing to shape these so-called new religions in Ireland. It's still incredibly influential in terms of shaping our experiences. And I think when you look at conversion, you can really see that. The other component of my research that I've tried to incorporate is not just looking at Mormons' relationships to Irish society or to Irish religion, looking outwards, but also to look inwards at what is Mormons' relationships to their own religion, to Mormonism itself as a global faith. Really what I found, and again this is quite well established in the literature, is that Mormonism is a very hierarchical and quite tightly controlled religious organisation. They have a policy called correlation, which I've made mention of here in the slides. And correlation was introduced in the 1960s as a way to try to standardise the faith because it was expanding quite rapidly. They were gaining millions of members across the globe, and they were concerned that as the religion expanded worldwide that it might lose something of itself, that its core religious message would be lost or that traditions might be modified in a way that they would not find helpful. So in essence, correlation standardised the faith. It standardised the teaching material, the lessons, the local leadership plans, even the architecture, the layout of the buildings. Everything was standardised internationally to try to create some sort of a continuity of experience. On the basis of that, we kind of assume that Mormonism is experienced relatively similarly across the globe. But actually, again, there's a good body of emerging studies on global Mormonism which shows that that's definitely not the case. And it's kind of convenient timing for me because I'm kind of in the middle of this emerging subfield, if you like, within Mormon studies, which is looking at how Mormonism is experienced in a variety of different countries, including Ireland. And definitely my research is showing what that research is showing, which is that despite correlation and despite the standardisation of the church and how tightly controlled it is, there's actually a good degree of adaptability when you look at a local level or at a national level. So in my research, for instance, I found that if you look at a congregational level or at individual Mormons in Ireland, you'll find that they are aware of what the Mormon tradition is. They understand completely what the dominant narrative is. But they just disrupt it or challenge it or adapt it in ways that probably suit them a little bit better. One of the interesting things that I found is in relation to Mormons' understandings of the same-sex marriage debate. Mormonism disagrees with same-sex relationships and same-sex marriage and has actually pumped a lot of money in the US into funding anti-same-sex marriage initiatives. And so I kind of expected that that would probably be the case in Ireland. But in fact, I kind of found the opposite, that most Mormons of my research were telling me they voted in favour of same-sex marriage, that they had no issue with that in that regard. Likewise, I found that with gender equality, that the narrative is that it is a very traditional religion, but oftentimes Mormons in Ireland disrupt that too. They often have taken on the ideas of the dominant majority society of Ireland rather than the traditions of the religion to which they belong. So there can be a good degree of adaptation of what is a very strong traditional conservative religion. Ultimately, I guess to conclude, the bottom line is that what's happening with regards to Mormons in Ireland is that it's probably a bit of both. There is continuity. There's no doubt that it is change, it is rupture. Mormonism in Ireland is something new, but I think it's also something that is a continuation of what's gone before also. Thanks, guys.
Thank you so much, Hazel. Does anyone have any questions for Hazel? Any? One second. Yeah.
Just remark, I remember from history in school, when the Normans came to Ireland, according to history books, there's a phrase that occurred there, they became more Irish than the Irish themselves. Maybe that's something's happening here.
Yeah, could be.
Thank you. Do you have a question, John, or has Jonathan had a question?
Well, would you have any observations to make about how we go about forming traditions in our region?
Well, it's interesting you've mentioned that actually, because a big theme that kind of emerged in the research is this idea of diversity, particularly the ways in which ethnic and national diversity in the Southeast specifically has kind of started to adapt our ideas even of what tradition is. You know, I've spoken to people who would identify as black from Africa, or people who identify as white from Eastern Europe, and they've made their home in the southeast. This is where they are, and if they're here long enough, they even start to identify themselves as Irish. And so if you were to ask them about tradition, they will talk about whether it's a Nigerian tradition or Polish tradition or Romanian tradition, but they also talk about Irish tradition, and they speak of themselves as continuing something that is Irish, but perhaps just doing it in a way that is new. So this whole idea of increasing ethnic and racial diversity raises, I think, a reframing of what do we mean by tradition. And they're understanding that, and they're really engaging with it.
Just one final question from Jonathan.
A really quick one. Just in terms of your experience of the people that you spoke to, just you kind of recounted at the end, there's, especially in Ireland in terms of same-sex marriage and things like that, just as an example, there's somewhat of a rejection of traditional doctrine, but yet they seek to still be identified as being the same religious belief. You know, kind of very. Have you kind of experienced anyone that's decided that, you know, we're now a different faction? We're like the Mennonites of the Quaker faith, or things like that, that they seek to be identified as different as opposed to traditional.
It's interesting in the context of Catholicism, because definitely a lot of the Mormons that I spoke to said that they can see what you might call a cultural Catholicism, where people will sign Catholic on the census form and they'll say that they're Catholic, or they'll send their kids to Catholic schools, but they don't go to Mass or adhere to any of the aspects of the doctrine. Within Mormonism itself, you don't see too much of that in Ireland. You do see it in Utah, where there are far more Mormons, and so you will get what they call Jack Mormons. And a Jack Mormon is, in essence, a cultural Catholic. It's somebody who says they're Mormon, but they don't really do what's expected of Mormons. The Mormons in Ireland tend to be quite adherent, I think, because it's been such a challenge to convert that they feel as though they need to really do it. And so you don't tend to see a lot of Jack Mormons in Ireland.
That's super. Thank you so much, Hazel.